All right, let's look at the pharmaceutical part of opioids. This is definitely, like I mentioned, considered the drug epidemic of the current times. It's definitely been an epidemic for the last 5 to 7 years. When I retired from Phoenix PD, working career criminals, we were working a lot of heroin addicts that were involved in burglaries and then in retail theft. And I'm talking like teenagers and early 20-year-olds that are out doing burglaries just to support their heroin habit. So let's look at this. And this is by the numbers. And again, I go by the most recent survey I can at least find at the time. This is in 2016, the opioid epidemic by the numbers. So in 2016, 116 people died every day from opioid-related drug overdoses. That's it every day. I mean, it's just unbelievable. 11.5 million people misuse prescription opioids, and we'll talk about what opioid drugs they're, what they're called as we move through here. 42,000 people died from overdosing on opioids, and that's in 2016. That's in 1 year. 42,000 people just from opioids. 2.1 million people had an opioid use disorder. 948,000 people used heroin. 170,000, that's heroin. We're not talking like pills. We're talking heroin. So it's almost 1 million people using heroin. 170,000 people used heroin for the first time in 2016. 2.1 million people misused prescription opioids for the first time. So you can see the pills. I mean, 2.1 million that misused prescription opioids for the first time versus 170,000 people used heroin for the first time. That's why pills is the gateway to heroin use, because pills are easy to take. They're pharmaceutical, they're prescribed, they're clean, and people are more apt to take pills because it's medicine versus heroin, which you end up smoking or slamming into your arm. 17,000 deaths attributed to overdosing on commonly prescribed opioids, and we'll look at those. 19,000 deaths attributed to overdosing on synthetic opioids other than methadone. And methadone is basically used to treat people that are addicted to an opioid drug to wean them off. They give them methadone, which basically causes some of the same effects, but basically doesn't have the negative effects. And you can't overdose, as far as I know, from methadone. And then 15,000 deaths attributed to overdosing on heroin. What's the cost? In 2016, it was $504 billion, they estimate. All right, so let's look at this right here. This is statistically significant drug overdose death rate increase from 2015 to 2016. So this is just in 1 year. You can see where the states are that started like experiencing major issues. Minnesota, where I'm from, Texas, you can see basically the whole the northeast region of the U.S. is starting to experience more issues. And that's an increase of 18%. So let's look at opioids in Arizona. And I already have this pulled up here. Let's see if it'll come over. So this is a real-time tracker in Arizona. So this is a real-time tracker. Date range June 15, 2017 to October 11th, which is 3 days ago. They said it was actually going to be more like literally real time, but this is what as of a couple days ago. So this is about a year and a half in Arizona. 2,300 opioid deaths, 14,000 overdoses, and then they just go into some other facts here. But the link is in the slide that you have there if you want to look at yourself. All right, let's look at, I don't know where to put myself here. Drug overdose deaths. Drugs involved in U.S. overdose deaths, 2000 to 2016. So here's where you can see a major increase in what drugs are causing problems. I was actually in drug enforcement I went down to drug enforcement in 96, and I actually saw right in 2000, 2001, when we were noticing that heroin on the street, heroin used to be $20 for 100 milligrams. And it was stepped on pretty good, meaning there was a lot of cut in it. And I'm talking black tar heroin in Phoenix. I watched the price drop. Okay, so $20 for 100 milligrams. That same $20, the cartel saw an opportunity here because heroin addicts, like you get somebody dependent on heroin, and then they also saw that there was a lot of, there's pharmaceuticals. People were getting addicted to Oxycontin and oxycodone. And so when that gets too expensive, they transition into heroin. So I was in drug enforcement when the price went from, basically it stayed at $20, but rather than 100 milligrams, you got 250 milligrams. So it basically went up 2.5 times, and the purity went up. So now they're actually creating a market, and it's a continuous market. It's like building a residual-based business where you set something up online where you're selling a product and you have your advertising and you bring people in. And once the system's set up, the residual comes in. You get returning customers. You get them on a subscription, right? And now you have a subscription-based business. Same thing with heroin addicts. Is they're repeat customers. Again, they need it every day. So look at this. This is where it just drastically started shooting up. See how methamphetamine use wasn't nearly as significant, where synthetic opioids other than methadone, and look at heroin. So heroin was under 5,000 way back, like when I was in drug enforcement. And again, the cartel started pushing it, and look at how it just skyrocketed. Basically, in 15 years, it went up. And look at right from 2010 to now in the last 8 years, it went from under 5,000, boom. So that's actually about, a 7-year period of time where it basically tripled in use. Well, not tripled in use, tripled in deaths because of the overdoses. Okay, so here's one thing I want to mention about heroin. With all these drugs, like it's really hard to overdose and die. Other than from cocaine, you can overdose, like have a heart attack and die. But stimulants will just kind of like stimulate you. It's not as easy to overdose and die from it. Heroin or opioid-based drugs, it's real easy because basically they're seen as depressants, and they basically will reduce your heart rate or slow your heart rate and your heart rate. I said heart rate and your respiration, to where you basically either stop breathing or your heart stops because it just slows it down so much. So here's some opioid-based drugs. And they fall under the classification of narcotics: Vicodin, Lortab, Lorcet, Tylenol with codeine. You have Percocet, hydrocodone, codeine, OxyContin, morphine, Demerol, methadone. These are your pharmaceutical drugs that are opioid-based. They can cause seizures, respiratory depression, and decrease heart rate. And again, your heart can stop. So here's some pills. That's OxyContin right there. 60 milligram pills in this bottle. This is just an example of some pills. I'm not sure. I think that says OC for OxyContin, and that's 40 milligram. So on the street, it's roughly $1 a milligram. So you want a 60 milligram tablet, $60. 40 milligram tablets, $40. It's about $1 a milligram. There's a lot of diversion. There's a lot of people that doctor shop, get multiple prescriptions, and that is changing now, where now they can't do that because there's a central database where it's hard to doctor shop and get prescriptions from various doctors, and they don't communicate, and so they don't know that they're all prescribing the drugs. Number of deaths from heroin. Again, we just mentioned this, about 14,000 in 2015. And as we know, I think it was 2016 was that last slide where we've tipped over 15,000. So here's deaths from falling, deaths from guns, deaths from traffic accidents, drug overdoses. So it's pretty scary when drug overdoses has increased, and you're more likely to die from a drug overdose than from a traffic accident, or it's killing more people. If you don't use drugs, you're not going to die from a drug overdose. You still might get in an accident, but leading cause of deaths. So here's heroin use. This is again where you can see just how it started gaining a stronghold in the U.S. And you go 2005, 6, 9, 10, 2013, 2014. This is the last slide I could find on like a visual of this. So where do people get this stuff from? Well, in 2010, most people, or at least 2 million people, reported getting it from a familiar source. Or, okay, well, they get it from a familiar source, but over half of people who abuse prescription get their drugs from a friend or a relative. There's a lot of people that sell pills on the street. I didn't work any in drug enforcement because by the time I left drug enforcement, like pills weren't a big issue when I left in about 2006. The pills, I mean, we heard about it on the street and all that, but we didn't get as involved in it because there was heroin and meth, and I was working in meth labs, and so I didn't get involved with a lot of the pill dealers, but there definitely were pill dealers out there. So, and here is past year use of various drugs by 12th graders. You can see, and I think we covered this earlier in a different module, marijuana or hash, and it's usually marijuana, is 35%, amphetamines, Adderall, synthetic marijuana. So these are just an example of past year drug use. And we already talked about heroin. So that's the section on opioids. I'm going to pull up another slide here, so give me a second. All right, so here's some heroin paraphernalia that we looked at before. And what I've also included in here is the paraphernalia for pill taking. And you see how there's like all these black lines? That's because they'll put the pill on there and then they'll put a lighter underneath it and they'll start burning the pill. The pill will start sliding down and then they'll inhale the smoke through a pen canister or a straw, or they can actually dissolve the pill, break it up, and pull it up into a syringe and then inject it. So this is just some more paraphernalia associated with pill taking. Again, these will be on the PDF slide handout, so go ahead and it'll be on this one for the pills because you already have one for the heroin paraphernalia. So that's it with pharmaceuticals, opioid-based pharmaceuticals.